Hi everyone and welcome to the Dodo Bird Nerd. It's me, the Dodo Bird Nerd. And in today's Magic the Gathering video, I'm going to be doing a Commander Deck Tech for Toxrill, the Corrosive, from Innistrad Crimson Vow. So without any further ado, let's roll the intro, and let's get started. So the first thing to go over before going in depth into the cards I think should go into a Toxrill the Corrosive deck is probably best to discuss what exactly the commander does. So Toxrill the Corrosive is 5 black for a 7/7 legendary creature slug horror. At the beginning of each end step, put a slime counter on each creature you don't control. Creatures you don't control get -1/-1 for each slime counter on them. Whenever a creature you don't control with a slime counter on it dies, create a 1/1 black slug creature token, and you can pay a blue and a black and sacrifice a slug to draw a card. So there's going to be a couple different angles for this deck. One, we're going to want to proliferate those proliferate those slime counters to make sure our opponent's creatures go away quicker to make more slug tokens. We're then going to use those slug tokens both for card draw to get more triggers from both our opponent's creatures leaving and our creatures leaving due to the sacrifice trigger, and we're potentially going to look at ways to pump them up as this is somewhat a slug tribal deck. So that is exactly what I'm going to do with this Toxrill the Corrosive deck tech. So the first category to go over for this Toxrill the Corrosive deck tech is slugs. Now there isn't going to be that many, and they're not really the greatest in the world, but I did want to have at least some amount of tribal representation, similar to my Gormuldrak deck tech from last year. But yeah, they're kind of just here to say that it's somewhat a tribal deck. But they're decent in the deck though, so at least there's that. So the two slugs that are present in my Toxrill the Corrosive deck are Giant Slug and Gluttonous Slug. Obviously other than Toxrill. So Giant Slug is 1 and a black for a 1/1 slug. And you can pay 5 mana, and during your next upkeep, choose a basic landwalk ability. Giant Slug gains that landwalk ability until end of turn. So the benefit is that you can pay it on the end of your opponent's turn, so you can leave the mana up, and you get the ability in your next upkeep, which is not terrible. Though it is rather expensive, but this deck does have ways to pump it, so a conditional unblockable creature isn't terrible, as well as the fact that Toxrill can always sacrifice it for the card. And Gluttonous Slug, being 1 and a black for a 0/3 slug horror, with Menace and Evolve, whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield, if it has toughness or power greater than the slug, put a counter on the slug. So again, a relatively evasive creature that can potentially be pumped with some of the tribal effects in this deck, and could potentially be sacked for value later, is overall a pretty good card for this deck. So the next category for my Toxrill the Corrosive Commander deck tech is going to be Antheming the Team. We're making a lot of different slug tokens, so we need to find ways to make sure that they can actually, do more than 1 damage per combat step, which I would say is a fairly decent thing to want for a tribal-ish token commander deck. So first up we have Adaptive Automoton. 3 mana for a 2/2 artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. It is the chosen type in addition to its other types, and it gives all other creatures you control a chosen type +1/+1. A fairly decent lord for a slug tribal commander deck, as there isn't really many other ones, and it can also potentially be sacrificed to Toxrill later on due to the fact that it becomes the chosen type, so it would become a slug. Then there's Archetype of Imagination, 4 blue for a 3/2 enchantment creature human wizard. It gives creatures you control have flying, and creatures your opponents control lose flying and can't have or gain flying, essentially meaning all of our creatures are effectively unblockable except by reach creatures, which is a fairly decent way to get through with a bunch of small tokens or potentially larger tokens. Then there's Ascendant Evincar, 4 black for a 3/3 legendary creature vampire with flying, and other black creatures get +1/+1, and non-black creatures get -1/-1. So it will help to pump up our slug tokens, as well as make some of our opponent's creatures slightly smaller, making them easier to kick the bucket with Toxrill's ability, giving us more slugs. Then Paragon of Open Graves is 3 and a black for a 2/2 skeleton warrior. Other black creatures you control get +1/+1, and you can pay 2 and a black and tap it, and another target black creature you control gains Death Touch until end of turn. So again, it helps lengthen our team and can potentially help remove a creature by giving one of our creatures Death Touch. Next up we have Vela the Night-Clad, 4 blue and a black for a 4/4 legendary creature human wizard with Intimidate. Other creatures you control have Intimidate, and whenever it or another creature you control leaves the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life. So this card helps a lot in Toxrill decks, as firstly it gives all of our creatures pseudo-intimidate, helping them get through, as well as the fact it gives us more bang for our buck whenever we use Toxrill's sacrifice ability to draw a card, overall making it an exceptionally good card for the deck. Wonder is 3 and a blue for 2/2 Incarnation with flying. As long as it is in our graveyard and we control an island, creatures you control have flying. Overall, while we can't sacrifice it to Toxrill, it will likely end up hitting the graveyard at some point during the game, basically giving us unconditional flying for the rest of the game, with some exceptions, being a very good card for the deck in that case. Vraska Scheming Gorgon is 4 black for 5 loyalty legendary planeswalker Vraska. For the +2, it gives all of our creatures +1/+0 until end of turn, -3 destroys target creature, and -10 until end of turn. Creatures you control gain Death Touch, and whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, that player loses the game. Mainly we're going to be going for the first and last abilities here, as the +2 helps us to get damage through just by making our creatures slightly bigger, and the -10 could potentially help us close out the game by, if we can hit the players, just knocking them out immediately. And Eldrazi Monument is 5 mana for an artifact. It gives all of our creatures +1/+1 flying and indestructible, and at the beginning of our upkeep we have to sacrifice a creature if we can't sacrifice Eldrazi Monument. Overall, we will likely be able to sacrifice a creature every turn due to Toxrill Slug tokens, and it just helps our team a lot with those Antheming effects, overall making it an incredibly good card for the deck. Next up we have Hall of Triumph, 3 mana for a legendary artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+1. Overall, just a fairly decent Anthem effect for our Slug tokens. Heraldic Banner is 3 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, choose a color. Creatures you control of the chosen color get +1/+0, and tap, add 1 mana of the chosen color. While it's slightly worse than Hall of Triumph in terms of toughness, it does help ramp us, overall being a decent card for the deck in that case. Then we have Rogue Class, a blue and a black for an enchantment class. Just statically, it has whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of that player's library face down. You may look at it for as long as it remains exiled. And then at level 2, which is 1 a blue and a black, it gives all of our creatures Menace, again giving us nice pseudo evasion, and 2 a blue and a black, you may play cards exiled with Rogue Class, and you may spend manas or mana of any color to cast those spells. So the second level gives us some evasion, and the third level, when combined with the first just static ability, overall gives us some card advantage, making it a very good card for our deck. The next category is gifting tokens. Some people may not be running small creatures, and other people may not be running many creatures at all. So by gifting tokens to our opponents, it gives us more fodder for Toxrill to make us Slug tokens, making these cards very good overall in a Toxrill deck. So first up we have Akroan Horse. It's 4 mana for a 0/4 artifact creature horse with Defender. When it enters the battlefield, an opponent gains control of it. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent creates a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So not only does this give you some soldiers yourself, but also gives one opponent a 0/4 to potentially get rid of eventually with Toxrill. It also consistently gives all of your opponents 1/1 white soldiers, which will basically almost immediately kick the bucket with Toxrill out, basically translating to slugs for you. Overall, a very good card for the deck. Then there's Clackbridge Troll, 3 black for an 8/8 troll with trample and haste. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 3/0/1 white goat creature tokens. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, any opponent may sacrifice a creature. If a player does, tap Clackbridge Troll, you gain 3 life, and you draw a card. Overall, it gives one opponent 3 goats, which will probably almost immediately kick it due to Toxrill, but also allows you to potentially get even more slugs with his second ability if they don't want it to attack. Then lastly, there is Hunted Horror, black for a 7/7 horror with trample. When it enters the battlefield, create 2 3/3 green centaur creature tokens with protection from black under target opponent's control. Overall, giving 2 more tokens to a creature, and I believe Toxrill won't get rid of them because he doesn't target them. So overall, it just gives 2 creatures to an opponent that will eventually become slugs for you, and also gives you a 7/7 trample, a very good card for this deck. Then to go with Hunted Horror from the previous group, we have Hunted Phantasm, 1 blue for a 4/6 spirit that can't be blocked, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 5 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. Overall, a very good unblockable creature that also gives goblins to an opponent that will almost immediately become slugs for us, a very good card. Then there's Pursued Whale, 5 blue for an 8/8 whale. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent creates a 1/1 red pirate creature token. With this, creature can't block, and creatures you control, attack each combat if able, and spells your opponents cast at target the Pursued Whale cost 3 more to cast. Those pirates will be long for this world because of Toxrill. However, an 8/8 that will give us 3 slugs and is hard to target is also still pretty good. Then we have Slaughter Specialist, 1 and a black for a 3/3 vampire warrior. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent creates a 1/1 white human creature token, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Slaughter Specialist. It helps make human tokens, or just tokens in general, for our opponents that will become slugs for us, and it'll get bigger as we get slugs ourselves as our opponent's creatures leave the battlefield. a very good card for this deck. Next up we have Dowsing Dagger, 2 mana for an artifact equipment with equip 2. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent creates 2/0/2 green plant creature tokens with Defender. The equipped creature gets +2/+1, and whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you may transform Dowsing Dagger into a land called Lost Vale that taps for 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. Overall, it ramps us on the backside, and on the front side, it helps us make plant tokens which will become slugs for us, and overall can help a creature get a bit more damage through until it flips into Lost Vale, a very good card here. Then we have Curse of Disturbance, 2 and a black for an enchantment or a curse. Enchant player. Whenever enchanted player is attacked, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Each opponent attacking that player does the same. And now, Curse of Shallow Graves is essentially the same card, except you don't get the tokens if an opponent attacks, just they do, and the tokens enter tapped. Other than that, they're essentially the same card, and so they serve basically the same purpose in this deck, to give little creatures to our opponents, reliably, more consistently, as most of the other cards only do it once, and then it'll give us slugs over time. Very good cards for this deck to have. It also helps us to deflect some of the attacking to someone else. Again, a very good effect for this deck to have. And next up is Proliferating. We want those slime counters to be going on as consistently as possible. And now, while every end step, even our opponents, is still pretty good, Proliferating helps to be a bit quicker and therefore better for our deck. So we only have 4 cards with Proliferate in this deck. First is Flux Channeler, 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Proliferate, a relatively easy way to get that effect to trigger in this deck. Then Thrummingbird is 1 and a blue for a 1/1 bird horror with flying, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, Proliferate. Again, a fairly reliable way to get the effect to trigger. Then there's Contagion Engine, a 6 mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature target player controls. A way to make slime counters be a bit more effective in making slugs, as it'll make the creatures a bit weaker. And you can pay 4 tap to Proliferate and then Proliferate again. A very good way to almost immediately wipe the board of most small creatures very reliably and make a lot of slugs. Then we have Inexorable Tide, 3 blue for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell, Proliferate. Probably one of the most reliable ways in this deck to get a Proliferate trigger, just wiping boards and making a lot of slugs for us. Our next section is Corrosion Triggers. Because our commander is called Toxrill the Corrosive, I figured triggers that would help go with Toxrill's abilities would be called Corrosion Triggers, because puns are fun. So first up in this section we have Blood Artist, 1 and a black for a 0/1 vampire. Whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It works with the creatures kicking the bucket due to Toxrill's ability and making us slugs, and it works when sacrificing those slugs, a very good card here to help us close out the game. Next up is Butcher of Malakir, 5 black for a 5/4 creature vampire warrior with flying. Whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. A very good card in this deck, as it makes it so that whenever we sacrifice a slug, all of our opponents have to sacrifice a creature, and assuming they have a slime counter on them, will get us 3 more slugs, a very good effect here. And then Cemetary Puca is 1 and double hybrid blue-black for a 1/2 shapeshifter. Whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, you may pay 1. If you do, it becomes a copy of that creature and gains this ability. Basically, this allows us to gain control of some of our opponent's better effects on their creatures whenever they die due to Toxrill's ability. Next we have Eloise, Nephalia Sleuth, 3 blue-black for a 4/4 legendary creature human rogue. Whenever another creature you control dies, investigate, and whenever you sacrifice a token, surveil 1. This helps us a lot with card advantage, allowing us to investigate, basically getting us an additional card whenever we sack a slug to Toxrill's ability, and allowing us to get surveil both when we sacrifice those clues and slugs to Toxrill, a very good card. Then we have Kels Fight Fixer, 2 black for a 4/3 legendary creature Azra Warlock with Menace. Whenever you sacrifice a creature, you may play a hybrid blue-black. If you do draw a card, you can pay 1, sacrifice a creature, and give it indestructible until end of turn. A very good card in this deck, as now we can just pay an additional mana, basically play 3 mana, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards, a very good rate. Next we have Syr Konrad the Grim, 3 black for a 5/4 legendary creature human knight. With whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, and pay 1 and a black to have each player mill a card. Mainly we're just going to go around that first ability, basically allowing us to do a bit more damage whenever we sacrifice slugs to Toxrill's ability, or when creatures die due to Toxrill's ability, a very good card here. Then we have Bastion of Remembrance, 2 and a black for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life, giving us a bit more ways to end the game with Toxrill's sacrifice ability. Then we have Dictate of Erebos, 3 black for an enchantment with flash. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature, basically filling the exact same role as Butcher of Malakir in this deck. Then we have Grave Betrayal, 5 black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you don't control dies, return to the battlefield under your control with an additional +1/+1 counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. That creature is a black zombie in addition to its other colors and types. Basically, like Cemetary Puca, a way for us to steal our opponent's stuff once they die at Toxrill's ability. Then we have the Meat Hook Massacre, X black for a legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. And whenever a creature an opponent control dies, you gain 1 life. Basically, 1, it helps us to get a bunch of slugs with that -X ability. 2, allows us to win the game a bit more by sacrificing slugs to Toxrill. And 3, allows us to gain some life whenever our creatures die to Toxrill. Again, a very good card in this deck. Our next section are board wipes. Board wipes are a pretty good way to make a bunch of slugs in this deck, especially if they're one-sided, as Toxrill will stay alive, keep all of our other slugs alive, and overall be a very good way to make a bunch of slugs and potentially close out the game. However, even if it is not a one-sided board wipe, we'll still make up a lot of slugs with Toxrill, so they're still pretty good here. The first card in this section is Massacre Girl. 3 black for a 4/4 legendary creature human assassin with menace. When it enters the battlefield, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Overall, this will end up just wiping the board. However, we will go potentially a bit higher than we normally would have due to the amount of slugs that would likely be dying due to its effect. Overall, a pretty decent way to wipe the board. While it won't get us a lot of slugs necessarily, it's still a very good card in this deck. Massacre Wurm is 3 black for a 6/5 worm. When it enters the battlefield, creatures your opponents control get -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. 1, it helps us wipe the board with that -2/-2 ability, but it also helps us to close out the game whenever they're doing the thing that makes us slugs, a very good card here. Ingruk's Wake is 7 black for sorcery. Destroy all creatures you don't control and all planeswalkers you don't control. Just a simple one-sided board wipe that'll make us a bunch of slugs with Toxrill. Next we have Vona's Hunger, 2 and a black for an instant with Ascend. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. If you have the City's Blessing, instead each opponent sacrifices half the creatures they control, rounded up. Overall, a very good way to make a bunch of slugs, as well as get rid of a bunch of creatures on our opponent's side. A very good card in this deck. The last section here is generic fun cards. These cards didn't necessarily fit in one given section, but they're still very fun cards for this deck, so I thought I'd mention them here. First up in this section we have Skemfar Shadowsage. 3 and a black for a 2/5 of Cleric. When it enters the battlefield, choose 1. Either drain each opponent for X life, where X is the greatest number of creatures you control that have a creature type in common, or you gain X life by that same metric. Either can help you get a bit more in the game if you're a bit low on life, or potentially help you close out the game if you have enough slugs. Then we have Sludge Monster, 3 blue for a 5/5 horror. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, put a slime counter on up to 1 other target creature, which helps us get more slime counters on things. And then it has non-horror creatures with slime counters on them lose all abilities and have base power and toughness 2/2. Yeah, I heard a lot of people talking about this with Toxrill as they care about the same counter. Overall, this is a very good card in this deck as it helps get rid of those creatures a lot sooner with Toxrill. Then we have Perplexing Test, 3 blue for an instant, choose 1, return all creature tokens to their owner's hands, or return all non-token creatures to their owner's hands. It's a way to help us get through with a bunch of our slugs, and while we will have to return Toxrill to our hand, hopefully we're in a good enough position where we can just win the game with a bunch of slugs. So what did you think of my Toxrill the Corrosive Commander EDH Deck Tech? Let me know in the comments down below. What changes would you make for your version of a Toxrill Commander deck? Let me know in the comments down below. Just one quick thing before I end the video, the next video should be the first episode of Mammalia in terms of the Magic Taxonomy series. So as always, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Bye!